Today we're going to talk about the Unit 1. It's the introduction to the National Electric Code. And, after studying this unit, you should be able to give a brief account of electricity in its infancy, be able to identify the catalysts that brought about the National Electric Code, understand how the NEC began and its purpose, understand how the changes in the code evolves, and you want to become familiar with the terminology presented and the format of the NEC. That's mainly the book with all the articles in it. You need to know what type of information is found in the NEC, understand its layout, which chapters are contain what material. You want to understand the NEC's concern with equipment and material standards and be able to recognize various trademark logos that denote listed and labeled products. You want to comprehend the role of the Nationally Recognized Testing Laboratory, which is NRTL, and the National Manufacturers Association, which is NEMA, as well as the expanded role of the National Fire Protection Association, which is NFPA. And you want to be able to become familiar with the book's layout, the text conventions, and illustration methods. And you want to be advised on how to study the illustrated guide. Be aware that the electrical requirements in addition to the NEC may exist, and if so, that compliance is required. Now, the purpose is the practical safeguarding. The idea is to make sure that everything is installed in a safe manner where it's not going to cause problems. Now, we had some code changes that are new to the 2017 edition from the 2011, and there'll be tables that represent a requirements, multiple application possibilities, and then they'll have some diagrams, and there'll be figures used to further clarify the NEC applications. And they'll have formattal interpretations. These are used to promote uniformity of interpretation, and they're found in the NFPA regulations governing committee projects. The NEC layout, the table of contents provides a breakdown of informational topics, and they have the terms for acceptable type and quality standards of electrical wiring systems materials. Now you have labeled and listed. These definitions of listed and labeled are similar. These are contained in Article 100, which I think we'll discuss a little bit in the next unit. Nationally recognized testing laboratories. They were directed by OSHA which is Occupation Safety and Health Administration. They also certify that products meet nationally safety standards and ensure electrical products properly safeguard against reasonable identifiable risk. Now they'll have some of these labels that you've seen in the past, ETL, MET, UL, which has been around for a long time, the CE, FM, and SA. These, we'll go over these in a little bit more detail later on in this chapter. These are labels that are put on systems that have been listed or labeled by these organizations, and that's what you'll see the labels, and then they'll see what the standard is that they used to list it. Now, major testing organizations is MET Laboratories, Underwriter Laboratories, Intertek Testing Services, NEMA, which is NEMA, and an NFPA Association, which is NFPA. This book is designed to teach through visualization And there's highly detailed instructions inside the book and in the material that we're going to be covering. Is concise written information, the layout of the type of occupancy, text conventions. There's general checks with illustrations and warnings. The terms, now luminaire is used in this edition instead of lighting fixture. Luminaire is the new word that they're using for a full fixture. And when you study this text, you want to keep the latest copy of the NEC at hand, and we can use either English or standard metric systems for calculation. And then additional electrical requirements, you'll have to deal with local ordinances, and there's plans and specifications and manufacturer's instructions. What that is talking about is you have local ordinances that may or may not override what's depicted in the NEC. You may have situations where there's an engineer or architect that makes their specs a little bit stronger or than what the NEC says is what's required. And in the manufacturer's instructions, you should follow those instructions. They tell you how to install it, what type of circuit to put in. You should abide by those instructions. Now we're going to get into Article 90.1. All of Article 90 is depicting, if you looked in the NEC, some of this text taken right out of the book. And the purpose is a practical safeguarding. The purpose of this code is safeguarding of the persons and property from arising hazards. And why are you using electricity? Adequacy. The code contains provisions that are considered necessary for safety, compliance through with, and proper maintenance results in an installation that is essentially free from hazard, but not necessarily efficient, convenient, or adequate for good service or future expansion of electrical use. And then we'll get into the intention on the next slide. The code is not intended as a design specification or an instruction manual for untrained personnel. It's used as a reference guide as to understand what are the safest practices recommended by these association NFPA's requirements by the group that came up with these regulations. Now, 90.2 also covers the installation of electrical conductors, equipment, and raceways. Now, Part A, basically, we talked about that, public and private premises, commercial and industrial facilities, and installations connected to electrical supplies. Now, items that are not covered are ships, mining, communications, but some communications installation is covered in Chapter 8. And then all of these other items that aren't covered in this book are covered by other standards. Now, 90.3 code arrangement, basically what we're going over, the general requirements applying to all installations. You have general, which is your Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is wiring and protection. Chapter 3 is wiring methods and materials. Chapter 4 is equipment for general use. Now, special occupancies, equipment, and conditions, Chapter 5, 6, and 7 respectively cover these subjects. And the communication systems are covered in Chapter 8. And then the tables that apply as referenced. In other words, you will be going to those tables to look information up, to do calculations for load calculations, for figuring out the amount of conductors that would be required or you have a certain dimension of a box and you want to make sure that you're legally able to put in the conductors that are going to feed through that system. If not, then you have to mount a bigger box, things like that. Now, enforcement. Code is adopted and became a part of the local building code. It requires a requirement at this point. The authority having jurisdiction, which is AHJ, is responsible for verification and enforcement of the code. The authority having jurisdiction can allow exceptions to the code under certain circumstances. Now, rule definitions, you have certain terms here that are in the text, and it may say use terms like shall and shall not. Shall must be done. In other words, a requirement. It cannot get by without doing it, or else you're not going to be going according to the code. Shall not, which means it cannot be done. In other words, it's a definite no, this is not, and it'll show you in the book. Now, permissive is permitted but not required. In other words, what they're saying here is you can do it, but it's not a required part of the code, but it's a good practice. Okay. And then you have some explanationary text, and it's given in fine print notes, and it's really only information only that's, to help you understand the code better, or maybe just a general outlook as to why they did it a certain decision. Now, information annexes, this is non-mandatory information, and it's not part of the enforceable requirements. It's just information only. And then you want to be able to promote uniformity of interpretation and application of the code. This way we don't have issues that we had in the 1800s when all this started back when Edison came out with the electricity, and they went in there and they had like 12 different codes around the country on the East Coast, and none of them were saying the same thing. So that's how NEC came about. 90.6, we just went over that. 90.7 is testing laboratories. They tested the equipment. The equipment does not need to be retested or inspected prior to installation. You need to ensure the equipment is connected properly and has adequate power and current applied to the device. That is, manufacturer's specs may specify that. If there are none, then you need to figure out current draw of the device and do some calculations to figure out the best way to connect it. But most manufacturers send, the circuit type, the amperage, whether it's 3-phase, or 220, 240. And then wiring planning. You want to be able to have some wiring planning, basically for future expansion and convenience, provide for expansion, and then number of circuits in an enclosure. You want to limit the number of circuits in an enclosure and minimizes the effect of short circuits. You have too many wires in there, it's going to heat up. It can cause a lot of problems. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, the units of measurement, measurement systems of preference. We're going to use dual systems of units. If you're happy with metric, there's metric numbers in the book. And the standard, English standard, is what I grew up on, so that's what I'm sticking with. And you can use what they call a soft conversion for trade sizes, extracted material, instructed practices, safety, and compliance. Now, in summing up, you should take time to read Article 90 to fully. It's not that many pages. I think it's 3 pages. Who has an enforcement policy? Who is or not covered by the code? Terminology used in the code and how it applies. The code arrangement or organization of the code book, and how the code becomes a requirement in the installation of equipment. Now I want to go over this book a little bit here. We mentioned some information about using the book. This is your book that we're going to use for the course, okay? Now the code book is for reference and something that you want to be able to use to look up tables and things like that for doing calculations and exercises in the unit tests and stuff. Now, we have, you know, the history of the beginning of the National Electric Code. It came about when Thomas Edison started offering electricity to people in New York City. And after that took off and people found out that, you know, they could actually have light at night, which is something we take for granted nowadays, but in the late 1800s, it wasn't really something that everybody or anybody had. But by 1895, there was many as 5 different electrical installation codes in use, and no single set of codes was adopted by all. So to further complicate matters, there was an unexpected hazard darkening the prospects of this new industry, which was a lot of fires. These electronically caused fires were becoming commonplace, and by 1897, the problem was reaching epidemic proportions. A diverse group of knowledgeable, concerned individuals assembled to address this critical issue. And that's when the needs for standards became apparent, and then so the NEC came about, and their stated purpose is the practical safeguarding of persons and property from hazards arising from the use of electricity. And this objective has remained constant over the years. Code changes. The NEC is regularly revised to reflect the evolution of products, materials, and installation techniques. Since 1911, the National Fire Protection Association has been responsible for the maintenance and publication of the NEC. Now, the layout of the book, on page 4, you have the highlighted sections. There, that's your code changes, how they denote the changes between your 2011 version and 2014 version. Okay, you can see the highlighted sections. These are changes, and they highlight. Sometimes they'll have little notes in there. Sometimes they won't. The interpretation, again, we've mentioned this as 90.6, and this is to promote uniformity of interpretation and application of the provisions of this code. Formal interpretation procedures have been established and are found in the NFPA regulations governing committee projects. Now, this is something that, you know, I think we got, let's see. That's not it. Okay, now the code arrangement. The table of contents in the NEC provides a breakdown of information found in the book. Chapters 1 through 4 contain the most often used articles. Chapter 1, while relatively brief, just like I said, it's only a few pages, includes definitions essential to the proper applications of the NEC. It also includes an introduction and a variety of general requirements for electrical installations. More general requirements are found in Chapter 2, 3, and 4, addressing wiring and protection, wiring methods, and materials and equipment for general use. Special uses are covered in Chapters 5 through 7. Chapter 5 covers or contains information on special occupancies. Chapter 6, special equipment, and Chapter 7, special conditions. The contents of these chapters are applied in addition to the general rules given in the earlier chapters. So if you have special conditions or special equipment, then you need to refer to that chapter also. Okay, Chapter 8 covers communication systems and is basically independent of other chapters except where cross-referenced. Now, the final chapter, Chapter 9, it contains tables and examples. Each chapter contains one or more articles, and each article contains sections. And these sections may be further subdivided by the use of a lettered or numbered paragraphs. That's kind of how they lay it out. And then it's also completed by annexes A through J and index in a proposal form if you wanted to make changes to the code for some reason. Now the enforcement, we went over that again. Here we're going over the labeled and in addition to the installation rules, the NEC is concerned with the type and quality of electrical wiring system materials. The two terms are synopsis with acceptability in this area, labeled and listed. The definitions found in Article 100 are very similar. Okay. There's similarities within the definition include one, an organization that is responsible for providing the listing or labeling, which is those ones on the screen. That these organizations must be acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction, that both are concerned with the evaluation of products, and that both maintain periodical inspection of the products or manufacturing of the equipment or materials which have been listed or labeled. And a manufacturer of a labeled or equipment or material must continue to comply with the appropriate standards of performance under which the labeling was granted. Listed also means that the equipment, materials, or service meet appropriate designated standards or have been tested and found suitable for a specific application or purpose. And now we're going to go to nationally recognized testing laboratories. This year is prior to '98, there were only 2 organizations perceived as capable of providing safety certification of products, and that would be used nationwide. Congress created OSHA in the early '70s, and an issue was directed with establishing safety regulations for the workplace, and for monitoring of those regulations, OSHA adopted an explanation from the NEC and included it in the Code of Federal Regulations. In part, it reads, an installation or equipment is acceptable to the Assistant Secretary of Labor if it is acceptable or certified or listed or labeled or otherwise determined to be safe or nationally recognized by a nationally recognized testing laboratory. And this was testing nationally recognized testing laboratory, which is where that came about. And so we have MET Laboratories. MET Laboratories, working with the Department of Labor as well as other agencies, served as a working example for accreditation process for independent testing laboratories. In fact, MET became the first U.S. laboratory to successfully complete the process in '89, and thus becoming the first NRTL licensed by OSHA. Underwriters Laboratory, prior to the formation of NRTL in '89, electrical product standards were primarily written by Underwriters Laboratory. The good old UL symbol used to be on everything. And they performed certification and testing, and then standards written by UR are still widely used. The appearance of the UL logo on a label indicates that the product complies with the UL standard. It does not mean necessarily that UL did the product testing. It just means that it met their standard. Intertek testing laboratories, the selected laboratories of Intertek testing have passed OSHA's stringent NRTL accreditation process and therefore have earned the right to issue product approvals and list products using the familiar E, TL, listed, and CE marks. Intertek Testing Laboratories has been conducting performance and reliability testing to nearly 200 safety standards and applicable to workplace-related products since 1896. So those were the two testing laboratories that have been around for a long time before the nationally recognized testing laboratory was formed by OSHA. And then NEMA was another of the organizations found in 1926, comprises of companies that manufacture equipment for all facets of application, from generation to utilization. Its expansive products include product quality maintenance and improvement, safety standards for product manufacturing and usage, and a variety of product standards such as ratings and performance. A lot of times you'll see items that have a NEMA rating or something like that. The NFPA is more than a century old, dedicates itself to safety standards, gathering statistical data, conducting research, providing crucial information on fire protection, prevention, and suppression methods, and in much more. Now, the layout of the book, again, not only is the presentation of the material in this text different from others on the market, but the organization of this information offers a new approach. And the book we're talking about here is this book right here, the illustrated book. Okay. We're going to use this one. It's going to do all of our, we'll be using it for our instructions. But again, the code book is a good reference. And sometimes you may have to read in there to clarify a question if you have one. So I wouldn't just not use that book. Comprehensive information is given for user, family dwelling, multifamily dwellings, and commercial locations, and also special occupancies. To accomplish this task, information has been gathered logically from throughout the code book and concentrated in one section under the appropriate occupancy. See, this book is divided up into sections. Now we have section 1, and that's going to introduction, definitions, boxes, enclosures, and cables, and also raceways and conductors, and that's in section 1. After we're done with section 1, we're going to have, like I stated in the syllabus, we're going to have a section 1 test. And then after that, we'll start with section 2, which is one family dwellings. And there we have the general provisions, we have specific provisions, load calculations, services and electrical equipment, and then we're going to have our section 2 test. And then we go into multi-family dwellings. And under there, again, we're going to have the comprehensive provisions, load calculations for that type of environment. Then we start section 4. We'll have general provisions for section 4, the welding load calculations, service feeders and equipment. And we're going to do some of these chapters in here. We're going to do chapter, I think it's 15 and 17 in section 5, and then we're going to have our section 3 test. And then after that, we'll have our final. So that's kind of how the book is going to be broke down into the way we're going to go through it. And again, we talked about luminaire. It's an international term for lighting fixture. It's defined in Article 100. A luminaire is a complete lighting unit consisting of light source such as a lamp or lamps together with the parts designed to position the light source and to connect it to the power supply. Okay, so it's a full package. All you have to do is provide power and it should come on. It can be as simple as a light socket, or it could be something as complicated as a fluorescent light fixture with ballast transformer, items like that. And again, the local ordinances, the importance of local, city, state, etc. electric codes cannot be overemphasized. Local agencies can adopt the NEC exactly as written, or can amend the code by incorporating more or less stringent regulations. I covered that a little bit ago, but I want to emphasize that because when you're doing work with, you may have to deal with city inspectors and stuff, so they may have different code information than what you have. They may use a different version of the code. They may use 2011 and 2017 is out there. They may have adopted it already, but I'm not sure because it's just come out like 6 months ago, something like that. Anyway, engineers or architects who design electrical systems may also set requirements beyond the provisions of the NEC. So anyway, this unit just briefly discussed the history of the National Electric Code. It's not possible to do justice to the importance of the code in a few short pages. You only had a short glimpse of the history and present day supporting structure. This text moves on to the task of understanding the content of the code. Okay, so again, now after this is over, after you've reviewed this, I would recommend to go to the website, to Blackboard, do the Unit 1 test, and then I should have the Unit 2 video out there for you to complete. Now these are due by the end of the week on a Sunday. So, I mean, I wouldn't wait till Sunday to do them, but it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to read, Unit 1 in the illustrated book and then go through the video. And once you've done that, then you should have enough material and an understanding of where the material is located in the book to look it up if you need to while you're taking the test. There's 10 questions in the test. So if you have any questions or anything like that, just email me and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. And my email address is jmurphy@trcc.edu. So you guys have a good day and enjoy.